Kyle Traynor, welcome to Let's Be Frank.
Remy, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you in, and I feel like we should preface for anyone that doesn't know you. This is actually your studio. You are the founder of Pivotal Conversations, which is a hub for creators and podcasters, etc. And we are currently in your Melbourne studio, but we were just talking about the fact that you have kind of been bouncing around from Queensland and Melbourne. You also have a studio in Sydney. Tell us about your trips in a way, what it's like been bouncing between Queensland and Melbourne.
Yeah, it sounds like such a good life. Like a lot of people would, you think about that. And to be honest, I actually thought about it that way prior to actually having to go through it. I love traveling, it's great. And you get to meet a lot of amazing people. But you also, when you're building a life at home as well, there is elements that it does get, pretty difficult. I've got my little daughter at home who's just over 18 months now and obviously my partner. So the travel is amazing. The best part about it is meeting great people. And, as you mentioned, I get to speak with different creators and business owners every single day. Gold Coast was fun when the weather was good. So it's not as good now. Hopefully that'll turn and I might spend a bit more time up there. But the other part of it is obviously team and managing teams, So it's quite difficult to manage teams when, you're not there in person and building connection with people as well. So, there's definitely perks to it and it sounds like an amazing life. But you do travel a lot and there's a lot of early mornings, late nights and I can't be away from my daughter too long. So, you end up catching the red eye home and you're leaving before they wake up. So I'm definitely in a privileged position and I recognize that. So there's no complaints here at all. I love what I do and I love the ability to travel, but it's also, when you've got a little family at home,
of course,
leaving them is something that I never love to do.
Yeah. And like I said, you have the 3 studios. I'm really interested to know, do you have a favorite studio out of the 3?
You're going to get me in trouble here. I don't think I have a favorite studio. I think the thing that I love about them, they all have this studio is my studio that I actually had prior to launching the agency. So this is where I started my podcast.
Yeah.
My very first episode was shot in here. It didn't look like this. Although we haven't done a lot to it, it's a beautiful space, but it was bare bones, right? So there was a kitchen. There's a kitchen behind there that was completely open and we shot with that in the background every time. So, there was a time where I was like, oh God, we've got the BTS photos happening and there's a dishwasher, a dishwashing machine, that's there. And I was like, this is not great. But this is nostalgic for me. I still think this is a very aesthetic space.
It's grown with you.
But it brings back a lot of memories, Gold Coast is the evolution. That's kind of probably what we're trying to achieve. It's the closest to the vision. And it's exciting because we're going to keep opening locations. We're going to keep pushing forward. Even in Melbourne, we've got some things in the works at the moment that we're very excited about. But I wouldn't say there's a favourite because I'll get, Aiden might not be too happy.
In the group chat.
Yeah, I'll probably get having it. But I would say that they all hold different places in my mind, right? So this one reminds me of where we started, which I think is really important.
Definitely. It
keeps me grounded and it also is a reminder of how far we've come. So for me personally, I really do enjoy this space. And I know that eventually when we leave,
bittersweet.
It'll be bittersweet. I've still got photos when we first moved in here. And if I look to where we are right now, I didn't even know that this business was going to be a thing. So
yeah.
But Gold Coast is definitely the evolution of where we want to be. And Sydney was kind of the in-between, right? Which is this idea that we're progressing with every location that we have. So they all hold a different place in my heart for that reason.
Yeah. It's so exciting that you're continuously expanding and we'll touch on all that in a second. But I want to go back to your childhood because Your story and your evolution was so interesting to look at when I was researching you briefly. I want to go back to the beginning, your childhood. What was school like for you? Were you good at school? Did you have favorite subjects? All of that nitty-gritty stuff.
I was a naughty kid in school, I would say. Yeah. I don't know where this stems from, but I did not like being told what to do, what to learn. I was very sporty, so I was so interested in my sport, and that probably absorbed me going through school. But, you know, I was probably better in primary school than I was in high school. But, you know, school for me was very much a social thing rather than, you know, the learning. I didn't really apply myself too much, although I always got not bad grades. Like I was, you know, still getting good enough grades that they would never look at me and try to kick me out or anything like that. And I would get into a lot of mischief. But I think for me, the thing about school that I look back on now and even now having a daughter that I look at, and you have to actually really think about this stuff.
Yeah,
like you become a parent and you're like, oh, you know, it's actually, there's a lot you actually have to start to think about, and you've got someone else's life in front of you. And I think my advice for myself, you know, going through school would really be use it to explore, use it as that, the ability to be social, but, you know, try to really follow your own curiosities, right?
Yeah.
So really try to be curious and let that lead you. And you know, for me, that was something that I found that I really struggled with, you know. So there was certain subjects I liked and I would apply myself. So when I was in year 8, you know, I got 100% on every single project I did on history, which is really weird. But I just fell in love with leaders and you know, studying you know, different leaders and different periods of time and maybe why people were successful and the different, you know, and yeah, and so that was something for me that I found I loved and I applied myself. And then there was just other things that I just would like completely not even give any time. Like I would never do any homework. I wouldn't even do the projects. I wouldn't do any of that stuff. So school's a really interesting one in the fact that I think there's a positive element there socially, but I think there's definitely like disruption there. And I've even seen this, like, I don't want to go too far off topic here, but I recently did a talk at a school who offered video podcasting as a subject.
That's new.
Crazy, right? And so I said yes for that specific reason, and I was just blown away at how this school had all these different subjects that I think is the right avenue for people, and it definitely would have been the right avenue for me because I could then start applying myself in areas that really I had curiosity around and that I was really interested in. And you know, I probably would have applied myself a lot greater. So, you know, and I think with childhood, you go through so many different waves and there's things happening around you that you don't really have any control over. So as a child, I know for me, a lot of these things were very confusing, you know, and I said, you don't have any control over them. So a lot of the time, you kind of go into this system of school, which is like, okay, this is how you have to act and behave. But there's all these things happening around you, whether it's at home, you know, whether it's outside of school, maybe in sport. You know, I had some severe injuries as a youngster that mentally were a massive load on me, you know. So there's all these things happening around you, and I feel like none of that really, as a child, you don't really know how to deal with those things, right? And so obviously now knowing for me, it's as a parent, you want to, that's kind of your job, things, right? And my parents did a great job at that, by the way. So, but you still go through these raw emotions that you really have zero understanding of as a child, and it's sometimes scary. So, you know, I think for me, a lot of that factored into school as well, where I was going through these things that were absorbing me outside of school. So when I went to school, I had no interest in the thing that I was learning. I didn't feel it was going to benefit me at all, even though everybody said that you had to do things a certain way. It was probably after school that I really applied myself because I could really hone in on one specific thing and master it. And that's the way my mind works. Like, I don't know whether I'm a little bit ADHD or whatever. I got a feeling I am. Like my partner tells me that I am, but I'm not diagnosed or anything. But I tend to work that way when I want to. I tend to go really deep on one thing, and that absorbs me, and that's how I like to work. Similar to like what was happening in history class.
Yeah, it's really interesting that schools are now kind of exploring creative fields a bit more, because when I was in school, which wasn't that long ago, it was still very straightforward, old school way of learning and teaching, and then you could leave and explore. So it's really good that, for me, I think with my experience in school, that they're now exploring more creative fields for other kids, because I know when I was growing up, it wasn't as supported doing the creative stuff. Let's talk first job now. You said you were very involved in sport your whole life, so sometimes that can affect or change when people get their first jobs. What was your first job? What was your experience like in your first job? Tell us about it.
Yeah, I've had a really interesting journey in that I've actually never had a job. So
really?
That sounds crazy. So, I mean, through my childhood, I was focusing on sport. So my parents were very much supportive of that. And basically from 16, I'd be totally focused on sport. And there was like, okay, you don't actually have to get a job, but you have to apply yourself here. Then when I turned 18, I went to university and was studying marketing. And same thing, like it sounds crazy now because I'm obviously in the marketing space, but back then it was like I kind of chose it because it seemed like the most relevant to me at the time of what my interest might be. But then when you're going through university, and I felt like probably 70 to 80% of the time I was there, it wasn't really what I was interested in. So I did a year of uni and was and then at the same time did a personal train, because I was very much into my fitness at that point in time. So I did a personal training course at the same time. So I was kind of double studying and going through that.
Figuring out what you like.
And then university, I just was like, nah. Same thing. Like I was everybody. Like, I'm just like, look, I don't want to waste my time doing this. Like I would rather go in and do something right now that is going to be something I'm really interested in and that I know I can apply myself. And that just wasn't. Sure. I didn't know if I wanted to be a marketer, right? Like I wasn't like, I want to go out and get a job as a marketer. So there wasn't enough interest in that course for me to sit there and say, yeah, I'm going to actually give my time to this. So I then kind of decided to pull away. And obviously I was doing the PT course at the same time. And that was something that I probably didn't have huge interest in, but I knew that I was more excited of what would happen afterwards, right? Like I could get into working and actually dig my teeth into that, because I was very much into my fitness at the time. So that was something that got me really excited. And the reason I say that is because the way the PT industry works is you basically 60 to 70% of the jobs actually, they don't say this, and it's probably something that they need to fix, but a lot of the jobs you become a sole trader.
Yeah.
So sole trader is basically running your own business. So I became a sole trader running a business, not actually knowing that I was running a business. Like it kind of just was like, oh, cool. Like I thought it was a job, but it was actually running my own business. And that was probably my first real taste of having like getting into the workforce. And at the same time, I went through, I think was probably the number one thing that actually really has helped shape me as a person, which was at the time very scary and traumatic. But my mum actually met her, today's husband, which is now my stepfather. And they made a decision that they were going to move, away. So basically an hour to 2 hours away. So this happened when I was 19. Yeah. Just turned 19. So, and basically I had to make a decision. They were kind of, and to give you some context, right? So my mindset at this time was my parents had broken up. My mum had basically cared for me. My dad did too, but, solely lived with my mum at the time, who worked and, from her day would be like dropping us off at 8 o'clock, and she is built a very successful career in fashion. And And then she would finish work at 5:30, 6 o'clock, pick us up from after school care. We'd get home maybe 6:30, 6:45. She would cook dinner, you know, and basically look after us as a single mum. And she did that on repeat for 15 years.
Crazy.
So for me at this point in time, I was very much starting to understand the sacrifices that she had made and probably understand them a lot more now as a parent, just how hard it would be, and can appreciate that so much, right? But at the time was like, I don't want to burden my mum any longer.
Yeah.
Like she's met this guy, she's really happy. He was very pivotal in my life in regards to, at the time, you know, I was very lost and he had a military background. You know, he was meditating in the 70s. And so like he just, we can probably touch on this, but he just played such a pivotal role in like completely turning my life around, which at the age of 19, I would say I was probably at my lowest in regards to just life in general. But I didn't want to burden my mum any longer with hanging around. And that sounds like a crazy thing to say at 19, but like that was my mindset. And so I made a decision combined with their decision to move away was like, cool, like I'm going to actually go out and live and figure this out myself. And so, you know, moved out of home, was running a business, and what was then going to be probably the toughest like 2 to 3 year period of my life that I'd experienced. You know, there's probably been other moments now, but like that was a very big time in my life that I reckon really shaped me because of, I really think that if, you know, even with my daughter now, I think a lot about what are the things that I've learned. And it's a really hard thing to do as a parent because you want to care for them and you want to give them everything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you need to teach them autonomy. I think autonomy as a human is the key to anti-fragility. So this idea that if what you want for your child, in my opinion, what I want for my child is their ability to go out and make decisions for themselves, right? Whether that's about their education, whether that's about what they learn, whether it's about what they want to do in life and how they want to act and how they want to treat people. And so for me, moving out of home was such a big piece for me because it taught me autonomy. I had to pay my bills.
Yeah.
You know, I was running a business at the time, so I had to learn how to pay taxes, which sounds like a really easy thing, but you know, like it's confusing when you haven't done it before. And budgeting and you know, having to pay my rent every week. And at the same time, I was running a business that didn't really know was a business at the time, you know, like you learn that over time. But for me, that was so pivotal. And I look back now, and at the time I was so stressed and so anxious about it and went through some really bad anxiety throughout that period. But I look back now and say, you know, that decision probably helped me grow up at a really quick rate that shaped me as the human who now can take risk really easy and calculated risk and, you know, has a family and kind of went on all these journeys that I'm so grateful for now. So, you know, that was a big lesson for me moving out of home and that's probably the next evolution. You asked what my first job was, but then went on this massive journey of self-development, which spawned from my conversations with my stepfather and never looked back.
Do you think before all of these big decisions you made as a 18, 19-year-old, as a younger child, do you think there was any signs of being entrepreneurial as a young child?
Not at all.
None?
No, not at all. Honestly, like you hear these stories about people saying they were selling lemonade on the corner and they were doing all that. Not at all. Couldn't have been anything further from it. You know, I was so dialed in on, I think there was probably more signs of leadership just through sport. But, you know, I would say in terms of entrepreneurial spirit, no, not at all. I think my entrepreneurial spirit came from falling into running a business and then not having any other option.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything to fall back on. You know, I actually had to figure it out. And that was very stressful as a 19-year-old, you know, because my mindset was not always to ask and take. My mindset was not wanting to be a burden and you know, wherever that comes from, I'm not sure, but my mindset was very much around not wanting to be a burden. So I'm very much someone,
making it happen.
And I still have this to me, you know, we are all children at heart, right? So I still have this now, but I actually go very much internal when I have a problem and not external. So I tend to want to deal with things myself. And I think a lot of that honestly stems from probably childhood. Like my mum was at work.
Yeah.
If I had a
you
problem,
had to figure it out yourself.
Like I could call her, but like it was my problem to deal with. Like, and she, you know, she was in a high pressure role. So it was very much like a lot of this stuff that I was dealing with, I had to internalize. And, you know, even to this day now, I tend to do that. You know, if there's a problem going on, I internalize it and I very much try to deal with it and take it on myself because I don't want to put a burden on anyone else. I don't want them to feel stressed. And so there was, I think my entrepreneurial spirit was born from like not really having many other choices.
Being thrown in the deep end.
Yeah. Like I did, you know, like I said, I was paying my own rent, my own bills, running a business and growing a business from a very young age, you know, basically out of school. So I didn't believe I probably had the choice there if I was honest, but I just didn't believe I had those choices because of my childhood and how I was wired. So a lot of that I would take it on my back and just internalize it and deal with it myself. And it's very different when you're not around people. You know, when you live by yourself, you don't have outlets.
No.
You know, you're not sitting on the couch with someone and all of a sudden you can just like little hints of like, oh, so this happened today or this is what I'm dealing with. A lot of it is you get home and back then, you know, I went through a period of time where silly me being young, lost my license and was running a business. I had expanded the business at this point, but was running one part of my business in the western suburbs, one part in Port Melbourne.
Wow.
Didn't have a license and had to travel between the two. And so I was working like 5:30 a.m. in the western suburbs till like 11 or 12. I would then get on a train, make my way to Port Melbourne and work from there from 2 o'clock till about 9:30 at night. And I would go home. I used to have this little tray and I would crack some eggs in the tray and put like a little bit of cheese and some meat. I would put it in the oven and I would eat that every night and then I'd go to bed and do the same thing over and over. And I did that for like 2.5 years.
Wow.
Because of there was no other choice, you know? So, I don't, and again, like that's, I think for me, being an entrepreneur is about the ability to have a vision, take risk, and then be bold enough to actually talk about that vision with the world. And, you know, when you're bold enough to put that vision out, and you can see it and you can feel it, it'll come to fruition. But the other side of that is it might not, right? And that's the risk part of it. And so for me, I think I have a much greater tolerance of risk right now because it didn't feel like risk when I was 19. It just felt like I don't really have another choice right now. So, you know, that's something that I definitely would say that was where my entrepreneurial spirit was born.
When did personal training and the gym area of fitness come into your life? Was it after you had your second knee reconstruction? How did this whole business blossom? Obviously, you said you were studying at the same time as uni, but where did this love for fitness come from? Yeah,
I mean, it came from not having the thing that I actually loved, which was football, right? So during those times, I needed to like tame my mind with something, you know? So the gym became something that I fell in love with because it was another, you play sport and you try to progress in sport, and that's your self-actualization. That's your feeling of progress, and that you're getting better at something. And I think every person in life needs to have something that they feel like they're progressing at, in order to feel fulfilled and more importantly, like be sane, like I feel like we turn to things when we don't feel like we're progressing. So the gym became that for me, and I fell in love with it because I felt myself getting stronger. It challenged me and I loved that feeling, and it became that. And then I carried that into obviously my studies, and that's probably why what the gym did for me, and it completely transformed me in my ability to have discipline, whether that and stick to something and do what I said I was going to do, which I think is just imperative. Like when you say you're going to do something in life, your ability to then follow up and actually do that thing is like literally dictates whether or not you're going to be successful. So for me, that was my first kind of taste of it, which was like, cool, like I want to get in shape, and I'm going to say disciplined to get in shape. And I fell in love with that feeling, right? And so
gave you a why.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. It gave me a why. It gave me a sense of purpose and progression, you know, about myself, and something that I again could tame my mind with, because it kept me on track. It kept me from just getting distracted. Yeah. And there's so many distractions in life that you need that thing that's going to tame you and keep you on track and keep you focused. And so that was the first kind of feeling of that, which was amazing. And then, I think a PT course at the time was something you could do for like 5 hours a week. Yeah. And like it was cheap. And I was like, cool, like I'll just do this on the side just in case. And so, that was kind of like my first iteration of that. And then just this idea that I could then do that for other people was something that was really exciting for me. And that's how I got into it. Yeah.
You kind of transitioned from fitness and PT coaching to then doing online videos with your coaching, and you started integrating business into that, and then you started Pivotal Conversations, the podcast, before it was this whole company. Was the podcast something you planned and did to reach more people talking about fitness and business on a deeper level?
Yeah, the podcasting is a really interesting. So I had the way my business progressed is I became a PT. Yeah. And that was amazing. And I started to see a lot of great success, not straight away, but over time with that. And then eventually I had coaches that would come underneath me, and my business grew that way. And then where I ended up getting to was a point where I transitioned into more consulting, and I would run these events, and I would bring people and fly them in from different states and then sometimes different countries, and I would run these educational events. So I would go to this, I would go to someone in America and I'd say, hey, I want you to feature this event. I'm going to have some other speakers from Australia, and I'll sell the tickets and do all of that, do all the marketing. You just have to show up and present, and this is the topic you'll present on.
And was that more business-sided, personal
bit
branding?
Of everything. So it was like for fitness professionals, didn't matter what they did. So it was a mixture of business and then some more technical, I would flew the number one sports scientist out, / movement person from America, and then built Australian talent around him. And we did a 2-day event, sold that out, 250 people across 2 days. And amazing, right? So that was kind of like the evolution of it. Now, one of the guys, his name's Dr. Jordan Shallow. So he currently is an exercise and human movement. I'm probably butchering his title, but he works on like the biggest athletes in the world. Whether that's NHL, NFL in America. He's done a lot of work with, some really big stars over here in Australia, like tennis stars and stuff like that. I brought him over and he's like, oh, dude, do you want to come on my podcast? And this was like 2016. Yeah. Right? Wow. So audio only. Yeah. I think we did a little bit of video, but like not much. And I was like, yeah, cool. Sounds good. He's like, I'm like, how many people listen? He'd be like, oh, like, maybe 60, 70,000 people a month. And I was like,
wow.
What? Anyway, so I was like, cool. And I did this thing. I was so nervous. I was sweating like before it. And I did this thing, this podcast, and it went so well. And then I just had this influx of business, this influx of like people reaching out, just being like, man, that was like, I really connect with that, and really great feedback. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is crazy.
What is this? Yeah.
Yeah, like, this is nuts. I've never felt this before. Anyway, he's a good friend of mine now. Jordan was like, you need to like start a podcast. And I was like, oh yeah, cool. We'll do that. So I started a podcast, which actually at the time, I don't think it was, actually, no, it was called Pivotal Conversations. So that was the very first part of it. And it was actually attached to the previous business that I had, and it was very niche. And really my kind of consensus on, and the reason we named the podcast Pivotal Conversations, and the reason this is called Pivotal Conversations, is because it actually goes back to a story of my stepdad. And at the time I was struggling with what I would say now is alcohol abuse. Now, not in the fact that I would drink every night or anything like that, but I would spend my weekends partying, right? And at the time, most people would say, yeah, but you were young. And I think that can sometimes be, for some people, that's true. For me, I knew that wasn't true. Yeah. Like, I was hiding behind that and these feelings that I had at the time, which was probably spawning from my childhood. And I just was in a rut. I wasn't going anywhere. Some people can have a good time and they can function. And that's the reality of life. Other people, due to past trauma and different things, cannot. And I was one of those people, I was one of those people that alcohol was ruining my life, and was giving me, it was a mask for a lot of the trauma that I'd been through, whether it was my mum and dad splitting up or anything like that. So for me, I knew and could recognize that, but you're so unconsciously doing this that and there's a masking happening, that there's like I call it willful blindness. It's when you know something's happening, but you continue to do it because it's much harder to actually change and,
lying
actually
to yourself.
Yeah. Like, it's much easier to sit in pain that's comfortable than to actually take the risk to make change. And so it come down to like a simple conversation that I had with my stepfather. I actually reached out to him, which was a big thing at the time, because he was like, I don't know, he'd been my mum like maybe 2 years, right? Yeah. And I was like, he's always awkward, like, he's from England, and like he would always come over and be like, he'd be on the couch, and I just wouldn't really give him the time of day. And this was the early days. And then my mum was like, you should reach out to him and like have a chat. And so I did that, but it took me a while, didn't do it. Anyway, we sat down at a cafe in Port Melbourne, and he said to me, what do you actually, like, what does success actually look like to you? Right? Like, when you visualize it. And it probably took a few goes, but once I actually had a look at what success actually looked like to me, and I could feel it, it's not just about like, and I really believe this, and this is kind of something that stays with me, but you actually have to feel your goals. You have to put yourself in the moment that you have them, understand that feeling, and then carry that feeling with you every single day. And that's how you achieve something. But the conversation that he had with me completely changed the trajectory of my life. I then went sober for 12 months after that meeting.
Wow.
And made more progress in that 12 months than I could ever imagine with my business, and everything started to work in the right way. And so for me, that was a real lesson that, and I'm really big on this, and that's why I'm still so passionate about what we do, is that conversations are life-changing. Every single person that you speak to, if you ask them this question, they'll say yes. And that is that, can you pinpoint a single conversation that you've had that has changed the trajectory of your life, and it either made it better or worse? And every single one of us will say yes, if we really think about it. Because communication really play such a big role in our life that words matter, and they play such a big role in who we are. And so for me, podcasting, when I first felt that emotion of people telling me that I had impacted them, was like, hang on, so I've had this conversation with my stepfather who has completely changed my life. And then now I'm having a conversation that people are telling me, but it's multiple people, like thousands of them. And so for me, that was like really powerful, that conversations are life-changing. And my podcast was really at the core trying to have more of these conversations that I think that really matter. And those conversations were conversations around mindset and psychology, conversations around self-actualization, and conversations around making progress in life. And so that's how that podcast was born. And then it quickly evolved into something that you know, it was very, you know, it grew into something that I could never imagine. But that was the kind of premise of Pivotal Conversations, is that, like, you know, I always wanted to have conversations that meant something. Yeah. And that were going to have an impact. And so that was kind of the birth of Pivotal. Which, looking back now,
is crazy.
No one should go listen to those episodes, because I think about it. I'm like, oh my God.
I actually did scroll down to the bottom of your reels, and it was very funny.
Don't go that far.
It's really cool and fun to see the progression of someone's journey as well. Your podcast has obviously evolved, and it's not called Pivotal Conversations anymore. We were talking about you have had a break since your daughter was born, but it's now called the Startup Diaries. What do you think is different between Pivotal Conversations and Startup Diaries?
So what changed for me over time was the fact that so what ended up happening is I had that podcast, and I'd done, I think, 10 episodes. Yeah. And then I actually inquired to get this space because I was like, I want to go all in on this. And I noticed that in America, video podcasting was becoming this massive thing. And I was like, I want a space like that I can, you know, it was loungy. It was like all starting to happen. I'm like, that's what I want. All right. So I kind of went into this journey of getting this space, and I then went on a journey and was like, I want to figure out what the opportunity is in podcasting. Because I'm like, okay, coming back to like this, you know, my childhood was like, when I realize what I want, I will do everything humanly possible to make that happen. Yeah, obsessive. Like, it's all I think about. And so I was like, okay, cool. Like, that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to give myself a year to figure it out. And if after a year I haven't figured it out, I'll move on. So I was like, I had some cash there that I knew I could spend. It was my savings at the time. And I was like, cool, like I've got this there. And if I get to the end of it, and cause you know, I had to get a full-time producer. Yes. I had to pay rent on this studio. And I think the thing I would say I was very lucky with is that moving out of home really early, that was no one else's decision other than mine. There was no outside noise. At this point, I'd been out of home for a while, and not that my parents would have said anything, but parents being parents, like, they just love you so much that they're like, oh, like, is this the right thing? Yeah. Right. And you know, that's just naturally what a parent does. But for me, I didn't necessarily, a lot of people, like my family will say, I still don't really know what you do. Right. Yeah. And it's because I'm just very like in my own world. Right. And well, obviously podcasting is such a new thing that it's not easy to kind of, I think they're starting to get it. But what I would say is that I was very lucky that it was like, cool, my whole savings is going to go into this. And if I come out and it doesn't work, that's cool. Right. Like I'm okay with that. And my goal was to just figure it out. Like, what do I believe is the opportunity in podcasting, and more specifically video podcasting? So throughout that year, we grew to like a top 10 business podcast in Australia.
As Startup Diaries?
As Pivotal. As Pivotal. Yeah. We were growing on TikTok at the time. So I think we grew to like 50, 60,000 followers. We were going viral all the time, like millions and millions and millions of views. And as I got to the end, I realized I ended up getting a major sponsor on board, which was great. But I was just like, this just didn't feel like it was it, right? And to be honest, I was like, okay, like let's say someone else wanted to do this and they weren't willing to invest their life savings. like
very big commitment.
Yeah. And I was like, it's such an experiment that it definitely played a role in my success for sure. But it was such an experiment that I just didn't think people would take that risk. So I was like, I feel like there's a commercial offering here where you can make it really easy for people and you can give them this experience and you can make this way more convenient, way easier, way cheaper.
Yeah.
And so that was like, oh, and then I was like, Pivotal Conversations needs to be the name of that agency. So then at this time, I'd also really fallen in love with business, right? So the transition for me was like, I was doing so much learning on business at the time that I also selfishly like wanted to learn business. So I was like, I think there's a way I can make my podcast a business podcast. And really business isn't just learning the fundamentals about business. It's like, there's so much more to that. Like in order to be a successful founder of anything, you are going to like get slapped in the face 100 times.
A day.
A day, right? A day, exactly. And your ability to kind of handle that and keep persevering is what determines your success. And every time that you persevere and you decide to continue, and more importantly, you want to grow, you have to take a new level of risk. And so not only did I want to learn about business, but I wanted to like analyze these people that had done it and already been successful. So the obvious thing for me was like, cool, I'm going to rebrand my podcast to be Startup Diaries. I'm just going to go all in on business because it was very selfish of me. And I think in order to be a great podcaster, you have to be extremely selfish in what you talk about with people.
Also, people want to watch other people grow and learn with you. So
100%. And I was the audience.
Yeah.
Right. So that was another key thing that for me was, I look back on it now and I think that it was so authentic and organic because I was sitting in front of like, I remember interviewing Al Roseby, the managing director of Country Road.
Yeah.
Previous managing director of Country Road. And I was like, how am I even having this conversation right now? And I'm like, genuinely.
Feels like that sometimes.
Yeah. The questions you're asking, you genuinely want the answer to. And I think that's the key. Like if you're in a podcast and you don't feel that curiosity to actually learn from the person in front of you, you might be in the wrong field. Like you've literally got to be so interested in what you're talking about that it comes back organically because then you actually represent your community. And so for me, that was the next best thing that I was super selfish with was like, cool, I'm going to treat this as my way to learn from business. And I went on this journey where I started to just have these guys that I was buying their products and girls, like both males and females that I was buying their products, right? And like studying their content and like researching them and all of a sudden I'm interviewing them. And so, Startup Diaries continued to grow and I knew that I wanted to keep Pivotal for what would eventually be our first commercial offering as a business. So that was kind of like the story behind
the transition,
which was hard because I was like, growing rapidly and like people like, what's going on? Pivotal was like, it also had more breadth.
Such like a big risk to take as well when something's doing well to then, I guess you turned it into its own business and switched to Startup Diaries. The audience you would have built, it would have probably been really scary to leave that audience and ask them to go to something else as well.
You know what? I think there's a really good lesson in my answer to this, which I would, and only because I've experienced it, which would be, it didn't feel like a big risk.
No.
Because I had nothing attached to it, right? Like there was no business attached to it.
That's true.
There was just a community.
Yeah.
And the community were really there for the conversations. And I didn't really have, the conversations were going to change, but like, they weren't going to change dramatically. So at the time, it didn't feel like there was much to lose. And like, I believe the lesson is like, a lot of people are scared to take risk in life. And my advice would be to like, take the risk. Because like the worst case scenario is being exactly where you are right now. And for most people, that is like, you know, that's their existence currently. So like there's more risk associated with not taking the risk. And that's that you will come back in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years and be in the exact same position as you are right now. And for me, that was like, that scared me. That was, you know, and I also had come from a point where I had nothing, you know, like moving out of home early meant that I started from zero early. And so for me, it was, and I always kind of come back to this, is like the one thing I never want to do is get to like 60 years old and regret. Definitely. Like I would rather fail than have regret and shame for just not actually giving it a crack. Because I've seen what that does to people. And for me, that was something that always stuck with me. And, you know, I probably need to keep telling myself that now, because you know, life's about taking risks, betting on yourself, being bold and putting your thoughts and vision out in the world. And sometimes people won't agree, but, you know, to me, that's what really life is about. So, you know, I think that idea of regretting when I'm older, it still sits with me now, but it also was one of my biggest points of fuel to kind of keep taking risk and keep making progress.
Now you've got, obviously, Startup Diaries is your podcast. Pivotal is its own business with multiple studios. Did you ever plan on having multiple studios across the country, and do you ever see Pivotal going global possibly?
Well, that's a big question. So, I mean, this is probably more strategic, but one of the big insights that I got from actually being a podcaster at my, like, I'm not a production person. So Aiden will laugh at this because like I make these really dramatic requests that he's like, might not agree with, but the reality is I am the customer. So it means that I can navigate and I truly deeply understand what the customer wants. So when I was building my, you know, Startup Diaries / Pivotal, every time I traveled, I had to take someone with me. We had to book a studio that wasn't a podcast studio. Podcast studios didn't exist back then.
No, they do.
Nothing. So I would book like a studio that was not even purpose built, and they would only do half day or full day bookings. So what I had to do is I had to take someone with me, take all the equipment, try to fit something into a full day or a half day, which was dramatically overpriced, and it wasn't even on purpose, right? It was like, you know, sometimes it was like a cyclorama or, you know, it'd be, you know, so like it wasn't like purpose built. And so I'd have to pay for their flight, my flight. I'd pay them to travel. Their time. You know, I'd have to pay for an overpriced studio. I'd then have to book a half day or a full day and hope that my guests could get in. All of my guests could get, you know, one after the other in a half day.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is just way too difficult and way too hard. And it was costing me way too much money. You know, like every time I traveled, it would cost 5, 6, 7, 8 grand just to do. And I might get 2, maybe 3 podcast episodes out of that if I was lucky. So when I built, it was always a part of my vision from the very first day we actually started offering commercial services out of here to be across Melbourne, Sydney and Gold Coast. Always. Yeah. It was just how quickly could we make that happen? And so to answer that question, like, yes, like it was always a part of the vision. It was very clear to me that not only would that make it, like I knew that people eventually need more than what is in their hometown, like more guests, right? Like eventually you're going to run out of people. So I was like, cool, like when they travel, I want it to be as easy as possible for them. So I always looked at it as this perspective of one, like how, like it was very much like ease of use and convenience for people. But 2, it was also like, I just kind of knew that that's not something, this is me being like, you know, okay with risk, was like, I just knew that that's something my competitors wouldn't do. Yeah. So I always am really big on that. Like what are the things that you know will work that your competitors won't do and how far they won't go? Because like, this is probably the competitive side of me, is like, I'm all in on this. Like we don't do anything else.
No.
And so we only do this one thing. And so like, I just back myself that I'm going to do more. I'm going to go further. I'm never going to give up. And so I always think about it. That's like a little framework that I use, which is like, what are they not willing to do that I'm willing to do that also has a massive benefit for my customers? And if the answer to that is yes, then usually it's a good idea.
You've also spoken a lot in the past about mentorship and learning from others in the industry. I'm interested to know how your view on leadership has changed or grown since starting Pivotal Conversations and becoming a founder.
You know what? So people this is going to sound like funny, but leadership, I probably learn more. I've probably hasn't changed, but I get a lot of reminders. You know, I played in a football side as an 18-year-old. Sounds crazy, like it's junior sport, but we won like 3 premierships in a row.
Yeah.
And then the 18-year-olds, it was an under 18s, and then we finished. So when you're under 18s, you move up and you finish. But what happened was they then won another 3 in a row.
Wow.
So generations. And there was a lot of really great lessons that I had from a coach back then that he was hyper accountable. So, and what I mean by that is like, you would be held to account. And he would tell you, not in a demeaning way, but you would know.
Yeah.
What he also did really well is he built a bond within the team that and a culture that was very much, we loved each other. We had a lot of fun together, but we held each other accountable when we needed to. And then we had little rituals. And so I draw back on that a lot now as a leader and think about, how did we have so much success in 3 years, but then the generations which we had nothing to do with continued to have that success? And there was like little things, like every Friday night we would go to La Paqueta as a team, 18-year-olds, not even 16 to 17 to 18-year-olds. And if you didn't come, you didn't play.
Wow.
But that was driven by players.
Yeah.
Right? And it was like you have to be there. And that continued for the years and years after we finished.
Yeah.
Right, after we left. And so a lot of it, I stand back to a lot of it in like, I think as a leader, you need to be humble and you need to have humility and you need to be able to own and be accountable for your own mistakes. Because I think for your team to be able to see that, it's a culture that they can then accept their own mistakes and hold themselves accountable. And that's, and if everybody has that mindset, then that builds a culture. But humility is really important, because if you're not humble and you don't have humility and you're not willing to say I was wrong, you inevitably, you actually don't learn from anything. You don't grow. So I just draw back on that. And then rituals, like how do you build connection to your mission? How do you build connection amongst your team that they then have a sense of meaning and purpose that they believe in?
Yeah.
And they have a connection to the people around them where they feel comfortable enough. It's not a family. I don't believe in building a family. I believe in building a high performance culture where you have connection to the people you work with, but you can also hold them really accountable. Like if they're not doing their job, you should be able to speak to them and say, you're not doing your job. This is why you're not doing your job. These are our expectations. And, you know, everybody needs to be okay with that. And we had that kind of culture. You know, we had this, and it was driven by the thing that I would say is at the time the coach did really well is driven by us. Like,
yeah.
And that's something that I've always,
your commitment.
You know, when I think about what I want to have that kind of legacy where the people that have been a part of our companies have that kind of feeling where they look back on it and they have these things that are going to help them progress in life. I always talk to Aiden about what's going to happen. Everything has a cycle and everything has stages. And the one thing I want for all of our team is that they have stuff with them that's going to set them up for whatever the next phase of life is. And so for me, being a leader is the ability to have humility and be humble. It's the ability to build connection to both your mission and amongst each other. It's the ability to be self-accountable and to kind of hold yourself accountable. And those are kind of like the big three things that I think create a really like a winning culture. So it's not necessarily what I think you learn new things all the time, but for me, they keep coming back down into these buckets. Like, you know, it really does come down to those three things for me. And that's where I draw my lessons from. I literally go back to that period of time, because the thing that was like amazed me was, and even now is like the success was bigger than just the people that were there. And it was these rituals and this culture that stood the test of time. And I think your biggest challenge as a leader, and the biggest challenge I've had continuously, is the ability to get people on the bus to share the same passion, vision, beliefs that I have. Because inevitably, the success of your company is based on that.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I get everybody to buy in to the level that I buy in at? And that's your challenge. And especially as you become a bigger company, you know, you've got to figure that out, because, you know, then you have to, it's a wave, you know. You've got your senior leaders who will share that vision. Then they have to instill that into other people.
Yeah.
So if they don't have that vision, and their job is to instill that into others, they're instilling something, or if it doesn't exist in them, how's it going to exist into the people they're trying to, create those standards with? So, you know, I think that's the biggest challenge, and something that I've noticed as a challenge is how do you kind of build that culture? But I think for me, the thing I keep coming back to is humility.
Yeah.
Like, you know, mistakes are going to happen, but your ability to own them and progress from there. If your team sees that that's the way, then that's that's the model they'll take as well.
Yeah.
And then it also makes you super relatable. You know, we talked about before, like having conversations and holding each other accountable. Those conversations don't have to be like a negative experience for people.
Yeah.
They can just be like, we're having this conversation, we're on the same team, we're trying to achieve the same thing. And it's very hard to have that conversation with someone who isn't willing to hold themselves accountable, especially if that person is your leader.
Yeah.
We talk about connection. That's the quickest way to have disconnection. So that's something I'm always really open about and always trying to work on. And it's not always perfect, but that's okay. And as long as, you know, you try to work on that as a leader, I believe your team, and they can see that you're working on that, I feel like that's a really good starting point.
I really want to know what mistakes you see people make within their first 10 episodes of their podcast, which just either ruins them or is not good for viewers.
Yeah. So from a podcasting perspective, I believe the number one thing that should be the focus of anyone who's starting a podcast is what I call target value. Yeah. So target value is understanding who I'm creating value for specifically, right? So getting a really good understanding of who you want to create value for. So for me, when I doubled down with my podcast, it was people who were in their first 5 years in business. So I was really specific with that. The second part is, what specific value do you want to provide for them? And I always and specifically. So for me, that was inspiration and education.
Yeah.
For business owners. And so a lot of people, when they start, they kind of get into it and they're like, yeah, I'm just going to try this. I'm going to try that. And so when you understand how consumption of content works, like think about your favorite TV show. What was your favorite TV show? Friends? That's probably like my year. That's probably like, but like think about like, I don't know, one of my favorites was Suits.
Yeah.
Right? Absolutely love Suits. Fell in love with Harvey Specter. But what makes these shows so successful is what I call predictable value, right? So they delivered the same thing to you over and over and over again. Yes, the characters changed, maybe the story changed a little bit, but really it was the same thing over and over for like 10 seasons.
Yeah.
Humans, when they sit down to watch something, they want to know what they're going to get, right? So think about it this way. You ever sat down to watch a movie and you're like, I'm just not in the mood for a thriller right now, right? Like I'm just mentally, I'm not there. That's an example of how we consume content. So the reason I would sit down to watch Suits versus the reason I would sit down to watch Seinfeld or Friends are very different.
Yeah.
So let's say my podcast one week delivers Suits and the next week it's like Seinfeld. So one's like, you know, a bit more of a serious drama. The other one's a bit more of a comedic episode.
Yeah, lighthearted.
They're just completely different sources of value for people. And so I learned this when I was building my podcast is I grew to like 50, 60,000 followers on TikTok and was growing really big. The podcast was not moving anywhere near what it should have been. And it's because I didn't really have a good understanding of
consistency,
the audience and what they found valuable.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't delivering that on that every week. And so, you know, I think if you can nail that, or the sooner that you can nail that, the better. I call it like plugging the hole in the boat. Like you will progress very quickly if you can just retain your listeners every week. So if every week you can just get one person
to come back, yeah,
like you will grow, rather than like if somebody listens and they're like, oh, like this was so different to what it was last week. The next time they have a podcast to listen to,
it's not going to be.
They're going to go explore something else because they're like, I just don't know what I'm getting here. So I think that's like the biggest thing. Above all else, like I think you need to have a base level of quality. I don't think going above the quality that we actually provide here is beneficial. I think you got to have a base, and then I think it's just doubling down on target value.
So obviously we have been talking about how you grew your podcast to 50, 60,000 followers. You had people returning. You figured out the kind of algorithm you had to follow to get them returning. How did you, in the early stages of having a podcast, keep up with consistently posting and having the motivation? Because that's one of the hardest things to continuously do when having a podcast, posting on social media consistently, gaining that traction and uploading weekly.
Yeah, I got like a really funny story around this, but I think it honestly just comes back down to the discipline side of it. Like, and also like one thing I'll say that's huge is if you want to be a great content creator and you want to build an amazing podcast, you have to focus on the details. Like most people will do like 90% of the work, but it is in the details that you can gain the competitive advantage. And what a lot of people don't understand about content creation is there's a power law, right? And what I mean by that is if you think about YouTube and Spotify, and even the data actually tells you this, is that like 1 to 2% of content creators on both YouTube and Spotify account for over 80% of the views. So when you think about that, like you're in competition. Yeah. And one of the big things that unlocked for me was the realization that I'm actually competing against the biggest podcasters in the world. Like my competition isn't other podcasters starting. It's like other podcasters that are extremely successful, because most people only listen to like 1, 2, maybe 3 podcasts a week. Yeah. So like for your podcast to be one of those podcasts, it is such a big achievement, and like it's amazing. But like you have to get more people to build yours in. So you win in the details, you win in the 1%ers. And so like when I think about myself, I used to sit on the toilet every night at like 9:30, 10 o'clock, not going to the toilet, but like because I couldn't, like my partner would sit there and I'd be choosing the music for my TikToks.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I would have to get the song perfect. And like the ADHD in me is like, it has to be perfect, you know, like, and so I might take half an hour to just get it right. And so I would do that every night, and I would stay up also to post at 10:30 because back then, I believed I could tap into the American market, and I would be able to get a clip that would go live at an Australian peak time, like 9:30, but also then get the Americans waking up and get it, pushed. Now, whether or not that was true or not, I don't know. But my point is like I used to just obsess over the details, and I was lucky. It was all I did. Right, that's the other thing that like when I gave myself 12 months, like I just grew the podcast.
Yeah.
But like I spent so much time on the details, and so I think you just got to really push and spend your time focusing on the details. And that's like, you need to get a feeling with content that like, if I'm going to put this out, like, does it give me this feeling? Is it actually something that like, I'm like, yeah, that's it. And I used to get that. Like I used to sit there and I just knew, I'm like, yeah, that's going to hit. That snipper's going to go crazy. And like, you need to kind of get to a point where you're feeling like that with your content. And like, another big thing is like, when the number one skill that I see that determines whether or not someone is going to have success is, do you actually listen back to your episodes?
Yeah.
And it's like a hard thing to do because you're like, oh my God, I
don't want to listen to your own voice.
I hate it. But like, you got to lean into that because you learn so much about how you speak, how you execute, because a lot of people don't understand that it's actually the execution as a host in the moment that plays such a big role in things like getting good snippets, creating an interesting conversation of people to listen to.
Making them feel comfortable.
100%.
Up, yeah.
There's so much. So like I would say focus on the details. Like, I was really big on like how I would greet people when they came in. So I was like, always wanted to ask like 10 to 15 questions, right? 10 to 15 questions, and I would put my focus on that before we started talking.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I remember I interviewed Sam Wood, and he came in and we were in a rush, and like he sat down like this. And I was like, oh man, you can sit back. He's like, oh, I'm okay. And then like halfway through, he sat back like this. And that's when the conversation started.
Yeah.
And so like those are little details that I think go a long way. Like focus on the 1%. You got to get 90% of it right first. But once you get to that level, obsess over the details and try to find the competitive edge, because you are in a game where there's a power law existing and you are in competition. So I think play the game like that.
Podcasting isn't so niche now as it was when you started. It's quite becoming an oversaturated market. What do you see is one of the more common mistakes people are making when starting their podcasts?
It's a good question. So I would say that like, I don't know if it's, I mean, there's like that, there's mistakes, but I think like what you want to think about is, again, like just bring it back to who the audience is. What's currently out there for them? Like I'm really big on research and positioning. So like these are kind of classic marketing principles, but the idea that you want to first understand who your customer is, or your consumer, your audience, understand them at a really deep level. What are the things that they consume they're already interested in? Because it's out there. Like the number one thing I would say is like, if you're in a niche, there's already successful creators that are going viral and are creating content that people are interested in. So you can go and do the research and get a head start and get that information and actually reuse that in your own content to get the same result. It's like I call it like, re-engineering virality in a sense, but that is the head start. Once you understand your audience and you understand what they're interested in, you want to look out there and go, cool, what are they currently listening to, or what else is out there? And then how am I going to position differently? Like, how am I going to position against that? And then like, what's my strategy? So I think a lot of people just don't necessarily follow that process. They kind of come in, start creating content without any of these kind of concepts in mind. So my advice would be to research your audience that you're trying to target, like really diligently. Understand everything you can about them, understand what they're currently consuming. And then I would think about positioning your podcast to be unique and different. And usually that happens at the level of the format, right? So like there's different formats of conversations. There's one-on-one, there's interview style, there is panel discussions, there is, quick fire questions, there's the audience calling in. There's all these different types of formats that you can go to, but nailing your format right, the format has to be right for the audience. So like I was having a conversation with someone the other day and they're in finance and I asked them who their audience was and they said, well, my audience is, people that are either looking to buy their first house or they're only just starting their wealth building journey. And then I was like, cool, so tell me about your format. Their format was taking the news from the week and then trying to use that to deliver value. Mm. And like one of the kind of key points of the upcoming episode was interest rates. And I was like, if you haven't bought a house yet or like you've got one house, interest rates like don't really impact you significantly.
Yeah.
Like they do a little bit, but you're not really thinking about that. Like it's not like top of mind. You're like, oh my God, I have to listen to this.
Yeah.
And so the format wasn't good because what people really want is they probably want to learn how to save, right? They probably want to learn, who they need to actually, like what makes a good broker, what, like all of these things that are just like top of mind for them right now that have zero to do with the news. So that you can see that the format was off. So like getting the right format and creating something that's unique and different for your audience to get their attention is huge. And then just like post so much content. Like I'm really big on volume. I'm like, you should be clipping up as much as you can and just putting it all out there and learning what people are actually wanting. Like if you get a lot of people make this mistake of like, oh, like this didn't go viral. But if like your average views is 2,000 views or 3,000 views and this one gets 4,000 views, that's 100% increase on your average. That is an outlier. Look at what might have worked in that one versus your other ones and then double down. And then eventually you get to a point where like maybe they're getting, we got some clients, they're getting millions, right? And we do the same thing. Like if their base is 20,000 and, they're at, and they get one that's 40,000, that is like 100% increase. So, that's one thing. And then the other thing is like this is like the biggest thing. Aim to be good, not look good. If you are deleting posts or you're doing anything because it didn't perform and you let that be your guiding light, if you want to get good at anything, the thing that I've learned is if your goal is to look good, you're continuously worried about the perception. If you want to be good, you actually have to, by default, suck at something first.
Yeah.
Right? You actually have to be bad at it and recognize that you're bad at it and understand that that's okay. Like I did 250 episodes straight.
Wow.
Right? Like
that's crazy.
Think about that. And like I can sit here now and confidently talk about these things, but like people come in and they're like 10 episodes in and then they're like, oh, well, this isn't performing. Or like this, I'm not getting views on this. And then they like delete or like they don't listen back to their episodes. And there's all these things where they're more worried about looking good than actually being good. And so I think like if you can come in with this learner's mindset and like that's what I noticed. Like, a client, Danny Rance, he does content on like nightclubs and stuff, very niche. Yeah. But like his whole thing, like he came in as like a pretty successful business guy. And like he's just like, he's asking me like a million questions. He's like, and he's just continuously learning. And now he's like blown up over everywhere. And he still has that mindset. Like, so if something doesn't perform, don't worry about it. Like learn from it. And I think a lot of that comes from just putting out content, even if you don't think it's good. Because like we put out so much content, millions and millions and millions of views for clients, right? Across multiple different avenues. I reckon we can still probably only understand what's going to go viral 10% of the time.
Yeah.
So anyone who thinks
Very
that they
broad.
can tell you that like they're probably lying. And so I think the best way is to just put stuff out there and learn from it and then double down on the winners and cut the losers.
Yeah. And I think my last question for you is about pitching. You've obviously spoken to a lot of big names and you've had your podcast for so long now. if you were talking to someone about pitching, what would your advice be for them getting people to trust you? It's a big thing for me, being new and something that I'm still learning about with trial and error. Pitching to big names, getting them to trust you and getting them to want to come on.
Yeah, it's a really great question. So there's a few principles that I'll come back to from the perspective of like securing guests. The first one is people just don't give away their time for free. So in the case of podcasting, it's very rare that you get you have to pay someone to come on your podcast. It does occur, and maybe for some really, really big guests, but you need to understand, what do you have that's an asset to them that would make them want to come on? So the first one is like content. That's an easy one. Like when you do something in a studio that's beautiful and they have access to content, that's one asset. The second asset could be your existing audience, but it depends who that is, and how engaged that audience is. So understanding what you have that is of benefit to that person is the first key thing. And then that leads your pitch. So when I first started, this is how I would kind of pitch someone, right? I would go, here's examples of our work, and we'll give you full access. I would then mention, like, proximity is really important for people. If they see people that they know, like I would do this back then. Like this sounds crazy back in the day, but I would, like, if I had a guest in mind, I would ask like their friend or their co-worker or someone they knew, even though I maybe didn't want them as much, so that when I pitched that person,
you could say,
I could put them on the list, and they'd be like, oh,
yeah,
like if he went on it or she went on it, that would be great. Like there must be good, or, there must be benefit there, or they must know what they're doing. People just don't want to have their time wasted. So you need to think about, like, I'm pitching you to say, you're probably doing me a favor by coming on my podcast, but like, I know it's not going to be a waste of time. So that comes down to like proximity and who they know, and more importantly, who you've had on that they would respect. Second to that, it's what I said around understanding what is valuable to them and what might be an asset to them, and highlighting that in your pitch. And then the third one is like, just be willing to like get rejected. Yeah. So, I've worked in businesses for a while now, and specifically in sales. And so sales is like a lot of just like getting okay with the rejection, understanding like influence and negotiation. But a lot of it is like just numbers. Like, like if I reach out to 10 people, 5 of them might reply, 2 of them might say yes, 1 of them might show up.
Yeah.
So the way I did it is I would treat it like sales. So every day for half an hour, I would reach out to 10 people. And I did that every day for like 52 weeks of the year.
Wow.
And so a lot of people like struggle to keep up with the need to have like guests on their show, but like it really just comes back down to the numbers, because there's like 70% of the people won't see a message,
yeah.
which is, that's real. It still happens to like most people. 70% won't, and then like, you'll probably say another 10 to 15% say no. And then like, you've got to then try to get them booked into an actual time slot that suits them.
Yeah.
And so like there's all these like stages in which like people just fall off. And so if you do like set yourself a target every day and actually sit down and do the outreach and just do that daily, you eventually get to a point where you start booking people, and you're getting far into advance. And that's again another one of those things that's discipline. Like the competitive advantage that you need to succeed is by like doing what other people won't do. And what where they won't do. So like most people won't sit there every morning and reach out to 10 people. But if I do that, I'm getting an inch. I'm getting myself into that power law. Once you're in the power law, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
So like a lot of people aren't willing to grind to get into that top 10%, that top 5%.
Mm.
But once you're in there, it's so much easier. And you've got so much more benefits. You still have to work hard, and you still have to have the same mindset, like, because other people are trying to claw at you. And that's my view on all this, is like, you just got to grind your way to success. And there is one of my biggest things that I just wish I could pass on to people, that I feel like it doesn't get talked enough about is like competition exists. Like it's a real thing. And a lot of people are like, no, but like, we can all be friends and we can all do this. And it's not to say that I'm not friends, but like the work I do will dictate the success I have. And the reason that that is true is because it's the work other people will not do.
Yeah.
And that's a reality of life. And it's just, take that lesson into anything that you want to do. And then just think about these little things that will give you the success. And for me, that was like outreach every day, focusing on the 1%ers, listening back to my episodes, like all these little things that you're like, they're not that important. When you add them all together, they are so important.
Make the world of a difference.
And it compounds.
Yeah.
Because if I'm doing those things every day for every episode and somebody else isn't, me as a person and the skills and knowledge and expertise that I'm having and building and gaining will start to compound. And that will put me into the power law. And once you're in there, you really start to move and there's a lot of benefit. So,
I mean, I feel like I could ask you a million more questions just from this one conversation. We might have to do a part 2, but thank you so much for coming on. It's very exciting to have you back behind a mic again, and hopefully you'll be back in on your podcast very soon. So thank you so much for joining me today, Kyle.
Thanks for having me, by the way. And I just need to give a big shout out to you as well. I'm a massive supporter of you. I haven't done a podcast in a very long time.
Thank you for coming back with me.
You're doing great things. And so you should be really proud of yourself and just keep going after it. So thanks for having me.